The accusation hung in the recycled air of the first-class cabin like a toxic fog, sharp and suffocating. For 17-year-old Zoe Washington, this flight was supposed to be a triumphant journey, a celebration of her art scholarship. Instead, she found herself pinned by the cold, accusatory stare of a flight attendant named Brenda. In Brenda's eyes, Zoe's presence in seat 2A was an error, a glitch in the social order that she felt personally responsible for correcting. The quiet judgment soon turned into a public spectacle, culminating in a call to law enforcement. What happens when baseless prejudice collides with unimaginable power? What happens when the person you are trying to destroy holds the key to your entire world? Stay with us as we unfold a story of injustice, a shocking twist, and karma delivered at 30,000 feet. The scent of warm towels and subtle, expensive perfume filled the first-class cabin of Ascendair Flight 715 from Atlanta to San Francisco. For 17-year-old Zoe Washington, it was a familiar but always appreciated sensory experience. She settled into the plush leather of seat 2A, a window seat, her fingers tracing the buttery texture. This trip was special. She had just won the prestigious Acker Foundation's National Arts Scholarship, a full ride to the Rhode Island School of Design. Her father, who was waiting for her in San Francisco for a celebratory dinner, had insisted she fly first class. "You've earned it, superstar!" His voice had boomed over the phone, thick with pride. Zoe pulled out her treasured moleskin sketchbook and a set of graphite pencils. Art was her language, the way she processed the world. She began to sketch the sweeping curve of the Boeing 777's wing, the setting sun painting the clouds in fiery strokes of orange and magenta. She was lost in her world, the low hum of the cabin a soothing backdrop to her creative flow. That's when she first felt the stare. It was a heavy, probing gaze that pricked the back of her neck. She looked up and met the eyes of a flight attendant, a woman in her late 40s with a severe blonde bob and a name tag that read Brenda. Brenda's smile was a thin, tight line, a cosmetic gesture that didn't reach her cold, pale blue eyes. "Can I get you something to drink before takeoff, miss?" Brenda's voice was syrupy sweet, but with an underlying edge, as if she were speaking to a child who had wandered into the adult section. "Just some water with lemon, please," Zoe replied, offering a polite smile. Brenda's eyes flickered down to Zoe's sketchbook, then to her casual but stylish outfit, designer jeans, a comfortable hoodie from her favorite band, and pristine white sneakers. It wasn't the typical first-class uniform of business suits or haute couture. It was the look of a teenager, and in Brenda's mind, a teenager who didn't belong. As Brenda walked away, Zoe tried to shrug it off. She was used to it, in a way. The surprise on people's faces when she walked into an advanced placement physics class, the double takes in high-end stores. She was a young black woman who navigated spaces where people didn't expect to see her. Usually she could ignore it. But there was something about Brenda's scrutiny that felt different. It was more personal, more possessive, as if Zoe was an intruder in her space. The pre-flight service continued. Brenda served the other passengers, a man in a tailored Brioni suit, a woman with a diamond tennis bracelet, with effusive warmth and deference. When she returned to Zoe, her demeanor shifted back to that cool, clinical efficiency. She placed the water down a little too hard, causing it to slosh. "Careful," Brenda said, though the tone implied the fault was Zoe's. "We don't want to make a mess." Zoe simply nodded, placing a napkin under the glass. She wouldn't give this woman the satisfaction of a reaction. She returned to her drawing, her pencil strokes becoming a little firmer, a little more defiant. The wing on her page took on a sharp, fierce quality. The flight took off smoothly, and as the plane leveled out at its cruising altitude, the meal service began. Zoe had pre-ordered the pan-seared salmon. When Brenda arrived with the cart, she paused beside Zoe's seat. "Now, are you sure you're in the correct seat, dear?" Brenda asked, her voice just loud enough for the passengers in the adjacent seats to hear. "Economy's in the back. Sometimes people get confused." The question was a direct hit, a deliberate attempt to humiliate. Zoe's cheeks flushed with heat. She looked up from her sketchbook, her gaze steady. "I'm in the correct seat. Zoe Washington, 2A. Brenda tapped at her tablet with a long manicured finger. She made a show of frowning, scrolling. Hmm. It's just that this seat is usually booked for our executive travelers. It's highly unusual. Is there a problem with my ticket? Zoe asked, her voice calm and even, a stark contrast to the anger simmering beneath the surface. I'll have to double check, Brenda said, her eyes scanning Zoe as if looking for a flaw in her story. Just stay put. She walked off, leaving Zoe under the curious and pitying stares of the other passengers. The man in the suit, a Mr. David Chen, according to his luggage tag, offered her a small, sympathetic smile. Zoe felt a knot tighten in her stomach. This was supposed to be a celebration. Now it was an interrogation. Her father's words echoed in her mind. You've earned it, superstar. She had earned this seat. She had earned the right to be here without suspicion, without judgment, and she refused to be made to feel like she was an imposter. The celebration was turning sour, and the pleasant flight was quickly descending into a gilded cage, with Brenda Jenkins as its self-appointed warden. Brenda returned 10 minutes later, her face a mask of strained professionalism. She had clearly found no issue with Zoe's ticket, a fact that seemed to displease her greatly. She placed the meal tray on Zoe's fold-out table without a word. The salmon, which had sounded so appealing, now looked bland and unappetizing. The joy had been leached from the moment. Zoe tried to salvage her flight. She put on her noise-canceling headphones, hoping to lose herself in a movie and ignore Brenda's existence. But the flight attendant seemed determined to make her presence felt. She would patrol the aisle, her gaze lingering on Zoe every time she passed. She refilled Mr. Chen's wine glass twice, engaging him in polite conversation about his business trip. She offered the woman with the bracelet an extra dessert. For Zoe, there was nothing but a cold silence. It was a master class in passive aggression, designed to isolate and intimidate. The real escalation began an hour before landing. Zoe, needing to use the restroom, carefully placed her open sketchbook and pencils on her seat, securing them so they wouldn't slide off. The first-class restroom was occupied, so she stood patiently in the small galley area, trying to stay out of the way. Brenda was there, preparing a final round of drinks. She looked at Zoe, then at the empty seat, a flicker of something malicious in her eyes. "You shouldn't leave your belongings unattended," she said sharply. "It's against policy." "I'm right here. I can see my seat," Zoe responded, gesturing to the spot barely 10 feet away. "It doesn't matter. Anything could happen," Brenda insisted. "Someone could take something." Her eyes darted toward Zoe's expensive noise-canceling headphones. The insinuation was clear. Either Zoe was a potential thief, or she was too careless to have such nice things. At that moment, the passenger in the restroom emerged. As Zoe moved to take her turn, the plane hit a brief, unexpected patch of turbulence. It wasn't severe, just a sudden jolt that made everyone momentarily grab for their seats. In the galley, a half-full pot of coffee, left unsecured on the counter by Brenda, slid and tipped over. Hot coffee splashed across the floor and, unfortunately, onto the corner of Brenda's pristine white uniform blouse. Brenda let out a sharp gasp, more of theatrical outrage than pain. Her head snapped toward Zoe, her eyes blazing with fury. "Look what you did," she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. "What I did?" Zoe asked in stunned. "I was just standing here. The plane shook. You distracted me. You were crowding the galley where you're not supposed to be loitering." "This is a work area." Brenda dabbed at her blouse with a napkin, her movements jerky and angry. "This is a silk blouse. It's ruined." Mr. Chen, who had witnessed the entire exchange, leaned into the aisle. "Ma'am, with all due respect, that wasn't her fault. It was the turbulence. The coffee pot wasn't secured." Brenda shot him a withering glare. "Sir, I am a professional with 20 years of experience. I know how to secure my galley." This young woman was being disruptive. She turned her full attention back to Zoe, her voice rising in volume. "I've had my eye on you since you boarded. Something isn't right. First, the seat confusion. Now this deliberate disruption." The situation was spiraling into the absurd. Zoe felt a surge of disbelief. "Deliberate? I was waiting for the restroom. You're blaming me for turbulence?" "I'm blaming you for your attitude," Brenda snapped. "You come in here with your headphones and you're scribbling, acting like you own the place. You have no respect for the rules or for the staff." Every word was a carefully chosen weapon, designed to paint Zoe as an unruly, disrespectful intruder. The other passengers were now openly staring, their expressions a mixture of confusion and discomfort. The cabin, once a serene sanctuary, was now a courtroom, and Brenda was both prosecutor and judge. Zoe stood her ground. "The only person with an attitude problem here is you," she said, her voice shaking slightly but holding firm. "You've been treating me with suspicion since the moment I sat down, and I have done nothing to deserve it." For Brenda, this was the final straw. Her authority had been challenged directly. Her carefully constructed world of rules and hierarchies was being threatened by a teenager in a hoodie. Her face hardened into a cold, determined mask. "That's it," she said, her voice dropping to a dangerously calm level. "I'm not putting up with this any longer. I am reporting you to the captain for creating a disturbance. And when we land, airport security will be waiting for you at the gate." The threat hung in the air, chilling and absolute. Zoe's heart plummeted. Airport security? For what? Spilled coffee? It was a grotesque abuse of power. Brenda wasn't just a flight attendant anymore. She was an accuser, leveraging the full weight of airline security and law enforcement to validate her own ugly prejudice. The turbulence inside the cabin had become far more violent than anything happening outside the plane, and Zoe was flying directly into the heart of the storm. The final 45 minutes of the flight were agonizing. Brenda made a great show of marching to the cockpit, disappearing for a few minutes before returning with a look of grim satisfaction. She resumed her duties, pointedly ignoring Zoe, but the damage was done. A tense, uncomfortable silence had descended upon the first-class cabin. The other passengers avoided Zoe's gaze, not out of malice, but out of a shared, awkward uncertainty. They were witnesses to a car crash in slow motion and didn't know how to react. Zoe sat frozen in her seat, her mind racing. She replayed the incident over and over, searching for anything she might have done differently, but there was nothing. Her only crime was existing in a space Brenda believed she didn't belong. The injustice of it all burned like acid in her stomach. She thought about her father, waiting for her at the airport, ready to celebrate her incredible achievement. Now, instead of a joyful reunion, he would be greeted by the sight of his daughter being escorted away by police. The thought filled her with a profound sense of dread and humiliation. She pulled out her phone, wanting to text him, to warn him, but the fastened seatbelt sign had been illuminated for the initial descent, and she knew she had to switch her device to airplane mode. She was cut off, alone. Her hands trembled as she packed away her sketchbook. The drawing of the wing, once a symbol of freedom and ascent, now seemed to mock her. She felt trapped, not just in the aluminum tube hurtling through the sky, but in a narrative she didn't write, a role she was being forced to play. The troublemaker, the problem. Mr. Chen leaned over again as Brenda was occupied at the front of the cabin. "Young lady," he whispered, his voice kind. "My name is David Chen. I saw everything. What that woman is doing is completely unacceptable. If they ask me, I will tell them exactly what happened." He discreetly passed her his business card. "Don't you worry. Truth has a way of coming out." Zoe took the card, her fingers closing around the thick, embossed paper. "Thank you," she mouthed, a wave of gratitude washing over her. It was a small gesture, but in her isolation, it felt like a lifeline. The plane began its final approach into San Francisco International Airport. The city lights twinkled below, a beautiful, sprawling galaxy that normally would have filled Zoe with excitement. Tonight, they looked cold and indifferent. With every foot of descent, her anxiety grew. She could hear the landing gear deploying with a heavy thud, a sound that usually meant arrival and relief, but now sounded like the locking of a cell door. The plane touched down with a gentle bump and taxied towards the terminal. Brenda's voice came over the intercom, crisp and impersonal, reciting the standard arrival announcement. But she added a final, pointed instruction. "All passengers, please remain in your seats until the aircraft has come to a complete stop at the gate and the seatbelt sign has been switched off. For security reasons, we ask that everyone remain seated until instructed otherwise by the crew." This was not standard procedure. The subtext was clear. No one was leaving until the authorities dealt with the problem. The problem was her. Zoe could feel the stares of everyone around her, a mixture of curiosity, pity, and perhaps, for some, suspicion. Did they believe Brenda's fiction? Did they see her as a threat? She squeezed her eyes shut, fighting back tears of frustration and anger. The plane docked at the gate with a soft jolt. The jet bridge began to connect. Through her window, Zoe could see the flashing blue and red lights of an airport authority vehicle parked on the tarmac below, its lights painting surreal, dancing colors on the fuselage. They were really here. Brenda had actually done it. A different flight attendant, a younger man who had been working in the business class cabin, came forward. He looked uncomfortable. "Ma'am," he said quietly to Brenda, "the captain said to wait for the authorities to board." Brenda nodded, her arms crossed, a smug, vindicated expression on her face. She positioned herself in the aisle right next to Zoe's seat, as if standing guard. She was savoring this moment, this exertion of her power. The forward cabin door hissed open. The sounds of the bustling airport terminal were cut short by the appearance of two figures in the doorway. One was a gate agent, looking nervous. The other was a uniformed officer from the San Francisco Police Department's Airport Bureau. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a calm, professional demeanor. "I'm Officer Miller," he said, his voice even and authoritative. "I was told there was a disturbance on board involving a passenger." Brenda's arm shot out, her finger pointing directly at Zoe. "Her," she declared, her voice ringing with triumph. "Seat 2A. She's been aggressive and disruptive the entire flight. She assaulted me. I want her removed." Officer Miller's gaze fell upon Zoe. It wasn't hostile, but it was assessing, professional. He saw a teenage girl who looked more frightened than fearsome, her hands clutching a sketchbook in her lap. "Miss, would you mind gathering your belongings and stepping out onto the jet bridge with me, please?" he asked. His tone was firm but not unkind. Zoe's heart pounded against her ribs. Every passenger in the front of the plane was watching. With trembling hands, she put her sketchbook and pencils into her backpack, slung it over her shoulder, and stood up. She felt 100 feet tall and an inch small at the same time. As she stepped into the aisle, Brenda took a deliberate step back, a theatrical gesture of fear, as if Zoe might lash out at any moment. The jet bridge was a sterile, impersonal tube, eerily quiet compared to the cabin she just left. The gate agent hovered anxiously near the terminal door. Officer Miller stood with his feet slightly apart, a posture of relaxed readiness. "All right," he said, turning to Brenda, who had followed them out. "Ma'am, please tell me exactly what happened." Brenda launched into a performance worthy of an award. Her voice was laced with manufactured distress. "Officer, it was a nightmare from the start. This passenger was immediately confrontational when I verified her seat. She was rude, dismissive. Later, she was loitering in the galley, a restricted area, and when I asked her to return to her seat, she became belligerent. She deliberately knocked a pot of hot coffee onto me. It was an assault." She gestured to the faint brown stain on her white blouse as if it were a battle wound. "I felt threatened. The entire first-class cabin felt unsafe." Officer Miller listened patiently, his expression unreadable. He made a few notes in a small pad. Then he turned to Zoe. "Miss, what's your side of the story?" Zoe took a deep breath, forcing her voice to remain steady. She had to be clear, logical. She couldn't let her emotions betray her. "My name is Zoe Washington. I am 17. None of what she said is true. She questioned my right to be in my seat from the moment I boarded. The coffee spilled because of turbulence. I never touched her. I never raised my voice until she accused me of causing the spill. I was not loitering. I was waiting for the restroom." "Turbulence?" Miller looked at Brenda, one eyebrow slightly raised. The captain's report mentioned a few light bumps over Nevada, but nothing significant. "She's lying," Brenda interjected, her voice sharp. "She's trying to cover her tracks. Ask any of the other passengers. They saw how she was acting." It was a calculated gamble on Brenda's part, assuming no one would want to get involved, but she hadn't counted on David Chen. As if on cue, Mr. Chen appeared at the door of the plane. "Excuse me, officer," he said politely. "I'm a passenger from seat 3C. I couldn't help but overhear, and I feel compelled to speak up. What this young lady is saying is the absolute truth." He walked onto the jet bridge, a calm and authoritative presence in his expensive suit. I witnessed the entire flight. The flight attendant, Brenda, was hostile towards Miss Washington from the beginning. The coffee spill was 100% caused by a jolt of turbulence. The pot was not secured. At no point was Ms. Washington aggressive or disruptive. In fact, she handled the flight attendant's unprofessional and biased behavior with remarkable grace. Brenda's face, which had been a mask of righteous indignation, began to crumble. A flicker of panic entered her eyes. "He doesn't know what he's talking about. He's probably with her." Officer Miller gave Brenda a long, hard look. Her story was beginning to fray at the edges. A credible, well-dressed businessman was directly contradicting her. "With her? Sir, do you know this young woman?" "I've never met her before in my life," Mr. Chen stated flatly. "I'm a managing partner at Kinsley and Grove Consulting. I fly this route twice a month. I know professional service when I see it, and this was not it. This was a case of harassment." The gate agent, a young woman named Jennifer, looked increasingly distressed. She had been listening to Brenda's furious radio calls from the air and had taken them at face value. Now, seeing the scene unfold, she was clearly having doubts. "We still need to get to the bottom of this," Officer Miller said, though his tone had shifted. He was now looking at Brenda with a new level of scrutiny. "Miss Washington, do you have your identification?" Zoe nodded, reaching into her backpack for her wallet. As she handed over her driver's license, she felt a glimmer of hope. The truth was coming out. But Brenda wasn't finished. She played her final desperate card. "Check her ticket," she demanded, her voice shrill. "I still don't believe it's hers. There's no way a girl like that, dressed like that, paid for a first-class ticket. It's probably stolen or fraudulent. That's probably why she was acting so defensive." It was the prejudice laid bare, stripped of all its flimsy justifications. The accusation was no longer about spilled coffee or a bad attitude. It was about who Zoe was, what she looked like, and where Brenda believed she belonged. Officer Miller took the license and looked back at Zoe. He sighed, a weary sound of a man who dealt with the worst of human nature on a daily basis. "Miss, I also need to see your boarding pass or ticket confirmation." "Of course," Zoe said, her voice dripping with an icy calm she didn't feel. She pulled out her phone, her fingers flying across the screen to pull up the Ascend app. She found the digital boarding pass and handed the phone to the officer. He looked at the screen, at the name Zoe Washington and the seat 2A. Then he looked at the booking details. His eyes widened slightly. He scrolled down, read something else, and then slowly looked up. Not at Zoe, but past her, toward the bustling terminal. A strange expression crossed his face, a mixture of shock, sudden understanding, and something that looked suspiciously like dread. "Brenda," he said, his voice now devoid of any warmth, "you work for Ascend Air, correct?" 22 years, she said proudly, puffing out her chest. "And you know who runs this airline?" Brenda frowned, confused by the question. "Of course, the board, the executives. Our CEO is Robert Washington." Officer Miller slowly handed Zoe's phone back to her. He then looked Brenda directly in the eyes. "Well," he said with a quiet, devastating finality, "you might want to take another look at the name on that ticket, and then perhaps you should look up who just walked up behind you." Brenda's smug expression faltered, replaced by a wave of confusion. She turned, following Officer Miller's gaze. Standing at the entrance to the jet bridge, having just passed through the gate, was a man who radiated an aura of calm, undisputed authority. He was tall and impeccably dressed in a dark, custom-tailored suit, his salt and pepper hair perfectly coiffed. His face, familiar from countless articles in Forbes and the Wall Street Journal, was set in a granite-hard expression of controlled fury. It was Robert Washington, the founder and CEO of Ascend Air. He had been waiting near the gate, expecting to surprise his daughter with a bouquet of her favorite stargazer lilies. When the flight was delayed at the gate for a security matter, he'd felt a prickle of paternal concern. When he heard his daughter's name mentioned by the frantic gate agent, that concern had ignited into a cold fire. His eyes swept over the scene, taking in every detail with razor-sharp precision. The police officer, the flustered gate agent, the kind-faced businessman, the venomous flight attendant, and at the center of it all, his daughter Zoe, looking shaken but defiant. His gaze locked onto Brenda's name tag, and his expression grew even colder. Brenda's mind struggled to process the impossible reality. The name on the ticket, Washington, the CEO, Washington. Her eyes darted from the powerful man in the suit to the teenager in the hoodie. The blood drained from her face, leaving it a pasty, sickly white. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The universe, in one cruel, swift moment, had tilted on its axis, and she was in a free fall. "Dad," Zoe said, her voice a mixture of relief and exhaustion. Robert Washington strode forward, his expensive leather shoes making no sound on the carpeted floor. He ignored everyone else and went straight to his daughter, enveloping her in a fierce hug. "Are you okay, superstar?" he murmured into her hair. "I am now," she whispered back, burying her face in his shoulder. After a long moment, he released her, though he kept a protective arm around her shoulders. He turned his attention to the others. His voice when he spoke was dangerously quiet, yet it carried more weight than a shout. "Officer Miller," he said, reading the officer's name tag. "I am Robert Washington. This is my daughter. Perhaps you can explain why she is being detained on the jet bridge of one of my aircraft." Officer Miller, to his credit, remained professional. "Mr. Washington, we received a call from the flight crew about a disruptive passenger who allegedly assaulted a flight attendant." Robert's gaze shifted to Brenda. It was not a glance. It was a physical force. Brenda flinched as if she had been struck. "Assault?" Robert repeated, the word dripping with disbelief. "This flight attendant," he said, not even dignifying Brenda with the use of her name, "accused my daughter of assault?" "That is the allegation, sir," Officer Miller confirmed. David Chen stepped forward again. "Mr. Washington, sir. My name is David Chen. I was in seat 3C. I saw the entire thing. Your daughter did absolutely nothing wrong. She was the victim of a sustained campaign of harassment and prejudice by this employee from the moment she boarded. The assault claim is a complete fabrication." Robert nodded slowly, absorbing the information. "Mr. Chen, thank you. I appreciate your integrity." His eyes returned to Brenda, who now looked like she was about to faint. She was trembling, her face a mess of terror and disbelief. I didn't know," she stammered, her voice a pathetic squeak. "I had no idea. Sir, it was a misunderstanding. A mistake." "A mistake?" Robert's voice was like chipping ice. "Was it a mistake when you questioned her right to be in her seat? Was it a mistake when you humiliated her in front of other passengers? Was it a mistake when you accused her of stealing? Was it a mistake when you lied about an assault and called the police on a 17-year-old girl, my 17-year-old girl, because you couldn't fathom that she belonged?" Each question was a hammer blow, dismantling Brenda's pathetic excuses. She had no defense. Her prejudice, so clear and ugly in the enclosed space of the airplane, was now exposed on the jet bridge for the CEO himself to see. "You didn't know she was my daughter," Robert continued, his voice dropping even lower. "But that is the entire point. She shouldn't have to be my daughter to be treated with dignity and respect. She should just have to be a passenger, a customer, a human being." He turned to the gate agent, Jennifer. "What is your name?" Jennifer, sir," she stammered. "Jennifer, please escort all other passengers off the aircraft through the rear jet bridge. I want statements from every passenger in the first and business class cabins. Get a representative from our corporate legal team and the head of human resources on the phone for me. Now." "Yes, sir," Jennifer squeaked, scurrying away to carry out his orders. Finally, Robert Washington looked back at the shell-shocked Brenda. "You," he said with an air of finality, "you are grounded, pending a full investigation. Hand your airline credentials over to Officer Miller. You are not to set foot on another Ascendair aircraft as an employee ever again. A car will be waiting for you at the employee exit. You will be contacted by HR tomorrow." He had fired her without firing her. It was a swift, decisive corporate execution. Brenda looked utterly broken. The power she had wielded with such petty cruelty just minutes before had vanished, turning to ash in her mouth. She had tried to eject a passenger she deemed unworthy, and in doing so, had ejected herself from her own life. The speechless, shocked face was no longer Zoe's. It was hers. The immediate aftermath was a whirlwind of controlled corporate efficiency. Robert Washington was a man in his element, a crisis manager par excellence. While one part of him was the furious, protective father, the other was the sharp, decisive CEO cleaning up a mess that threatened the very brand he had spent his life building. While Zoe, Mr. Chen, and Officer Miller remained on the jet bridge, a team of Ascend Air's top ground staff, summoned with a single text message from Robert, swarmed the area. Jennifer, the gate agent, was now directing deplaning passengers from the rear exit, while a senior gate supervisor began quietly and professionally taking contact information from the first-class passengers who had witnessed the events. Robert led Zoe to the plush Ascend Air Executive Lounge just past the gate, a sanctuary of quiet leather armchairs and complimentary refreshments. Mr. Chen was invited to join them. Officer Miller, his official duties now intersecting with a corporate investigation, stood by respectfully. Inside the lounge, Robert's demeanor softened as he turned to his daughter. "Talk to me, Zoe. Tell me everything from the beginning." With a newfound sense of safety, Zoe recounted the entire ordeal. She spoke clearly and factually, detailing every condescending remark, every suspicious glance, and the final, absurd escalation over the spilled coffee. Her voice only broke once, when she described the humiliation of being pointed out to the police officer in front of a plane full of strangers. Mr. Chen corroborated every detail, adding his own observations as a seasoned business traveler. "Robert, if I may call you that, I've flown millions of miles in my career. I've seen good service and bad service. What I saw today was not bad service. It was a targeted, racially motivated abuse of authority. Your daughter was a model passenger. Your employee was a liability." Robert listened intently, his jaw tightening with every word. He wasn't just hearing about a rude flight attendant. He was hearing about a cancer within his own company, a culture of prejudice that he, as CEO, was ultimately responsible for. His phone rang. It was Susan Davenport, his formidable head of human resources. He put her on speaker. "Susan, I'm at SFO Gate G9. We have a Code Indigo situation involving a flight attendant, Brenda Jenkins, on Flight 715. Code Indigo was Ascend Air's internal term for a critical incident involving employee misconduct with major legal or PR implications. I'm looking at her file right now, Robert." Susan's voice was sharp and clear. "Brenda Jenkins, 22 years of service. Her performance reviews are inconsistent, mostly satisfactory, but there are flags. 3 informal passenger complaints over the last 5 years, all similar in nature: abrasive demeanor, condescending attitude towards younger passengers, overly aggressive enforcement of minor rules. One was from a young Latino man flying on a discounted family pass, another from a student of Asian descent traveling for a debate tournament. No formal action was ever taken. They were filed away as personality conflicts. A chilling pattern was emerging. Brenda wasn't just having a bad day. She was a serial abuser of her authority, targeting anyone she perceived as being out of place. Zoe was simply the one who had the misfortune of being related to the one person Brenda couldn't bully into silence. "The pattern ends today, Susan," Robert said, his voice cold. "I have 2 credible witnesses here, including a police officer. I want a full formal investigation launched immediately. I want security footage from the gate, the audio from her call to the captain, and signed statements from the passengers. I want this handled by the book, but I want it handled swiftly." "Consider it done, Robert," Susan replied. "What is the status of the employee?" "She has been grounded and her credentials have been revoked pending the outcome of the investigation. SFPD is holding them for us." "Officer Miller, thank you for your professionalism in this matter," Robert said, nodding to the officer. "Just doing my job, Mr. Washington," Miller replied. "For what it's worth, my initial report will reflect that the passenger, Ms. Washington, was cooperative and that the witness statement directly contradicted the flight attendant's claims. The accusation of assault appears to be unfounded." Meanwhile, on the other side of the airport, Brenda Jenkins was escorted by silent, stone-faced airport security through the sterile, non-public corridors of SFO. The triumphant walk of a victor had become the perp walk of a disgrace. Her colleagues, who had seen her as a senior, if somewhat prickly, veteran of the skies, now looked away as she passed. News traveled fast in the closed ecosystem of an airport. The story was already spreading like wildfire. Brenda called the cops on the CEO's daughter. She was led to a stark, windowless room in the airline's operations center to await the arranged car. The adrenaline had worn off, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. The lie she had constructed out of pure spite had unraveled with breathtaking speed. Her 22-year career, her seniority, her identity, it had all evaporated on that jet bridge. She had tried to prove that Zoe Washington didn't belong, but in the end, the only person who was truly out of place was her. The system she had tried to weaponize had turned on her with brutal, unforgiving force. The hard karma was just beginning to hit, and the full weight of it was about to crush her. 2 days later, Brenda Jenkins sat in a sterile, glass-walled conference room at Ascend Air's corporate headquarters, a gleaming steel tower overlooking the San Francisco Bay. The view, which she had once admired during training sessions, now felt like a cruel joke, a panorama of a world she was no longer a part of. Across the polished mahogany table sat Susan Davenport, the head of HR, and a man from the airline's legal department. The table between them was covered in a neat stack of files and a tablet displaying security footage. The atmosphere was cold, clinical, and devoid of any sympathy. "Ms. Jenkins," Susan began, her voice flat, "we have completed our investigation into the incident on Flight 715. We have your official statement where you maintain that you were verbally and physically assaulted by passenger Zoe Washington." Brenda nodded, clinging to the last shred of her fabricated story. "That's correct. She was unruly and I felt my safety was at risk." Susan tapped the tablet. "This is security footage from the gate area before boarding. In it, we see Ms. Washington speaking politely with the gate agent and waiting patiently. There is no sign of agitation." She swiped to another file. "This is the audio transcript of your call to the cockpit. In it, you tell the captain you have a belligerent, potentially dangerous passenger who physically shoved you. You requested law enforcement be present upon arrival." She then pushed a stack of papers across the table. "These are the signed and notarized statements from 6 other passengers in the first-class cabin. This one is from Mr. David Chen of Kinsley and Grove. This one is from Dr. Alicia Rao, a surgeon at Johns Hopkins. This one is from a retired judge. All of them state, unequivocally, that Ms. Washington was calm and polite, and that you were the aggressor. All of them confirm the coffee spill was due to turbulence. None of them witnessed any physical contact." Brenda stared at the papers, her hands trembling. The names, the letterheads. They were all from the very class of people she had spent her career trying to impress, and they had all sided against her. They're mistaken," she whispered, her voice cracking. "They're protecting her." "Why would they do that, Ms. Jenkins?" the lawyer interjected, speaking for the first time. "Why would a group of complete strangers conspire to protect a 17-year-old girl and risk perjuring themselves to ruin the career of a flight attendant?" Brenda had no answer. "And finally," Susan said, her voice dropping, "we have the reports from your previous passenger complaints. A young man you accused of being intoxicated when his seatmate confirmed he was drinking only water. A student you claimed had a fraudulent ticket until a supervisor confirmed it was valid. A pattern of behavior, Ms. Jenkins. A pattern of targeting individuals you deem, for whatever reason, unworthy of the service Ascend Air promises." Susan leaned forward, her eyes locking onto Brenda's. "The issue here is not just that you lied, Ms. Jenkins. The issue is that you weaponized your authority. You used the captain, airport security, and the San Francisco Police Department to harass a minor. You did this not because of a threat, but because of a prejudice. Your actions exposed this company to immense legal and reputational risk. They were a gross violation of our code of conduct, our values, and basic human decency." The lawyer slid a single piece of paper and a pen across the table. "Brenda Jenkins, effective immediately. Your employment with Ascend Air is terminated for cause, specifically for gross misconduct, endangerment of a passenger, and filing a false official report. You will be forfeiting your severance package and your flight benefits. We will not be contesting your unemployment claim, but be aware that any future employer in this industry who calls us for a reference will be provided with a factual account of these events. Termination. For cause." The words hit Brenda like a physical blow. 22 years of service, gone. Her pension, her travel privileges, her entire life erased. She was not just fired, she was blacklisted. The aviation industry was a small world. No other major airline would touch her now. Brenda finally broke. Sobs racked her body. "Please," she begged, tears streaming down her face. "It was a mistake. I was stressed. I've given my life to this company. Please don't do this." Susan Davenport remained unmoved. The time for apologies was on that jet bridge. You had an opportunity to de-escalate, to admit your mistake. Instead, you doubled down on a lie. The decision is final. Security will escort you from the building. But the karma for Brenda Jenkins was not yet complete. Robert Washington was not satisfied with just removing a single toxic employee. He saw the systemic failure that allowed her to thrive for so long. The complaints that were dismissed, the lack of proper training, the culture that might have implicitly encouraged her behavior. 1 week later, a company-wide memo was sent to all 40,000 employees of Air, personally signed by the CEO. It detailed, without using names to protect Zoe's privacy, a deeply troubling incident involving passenger mistreatment. It announced the immediate implementation of a new, mandatory comprehensive training program for all crew and ground staff. It would focus on de-escalation, unconscious bias, and cultural sensitivity. And at the bottom of the memo was the name of the new program, a name that would forever serve as a reminder of what had happened. It was called the Washington Mandate, but internally everyone knew it by its informal name, the Zoe Initiative. Every new flight attendant, every pilot, every gate agent would now be trained under a program born from Brenda's prejudice. Her legacy at the airline she gave her life to wouldn't be her years of service, but a permanent institutional course correcting the very bigotry she embodied. For Brenda, now unemployable and disgraced, this was the final crushing blow. Her name was erased, but her failure was immortalized. Every time she saw an Ascend airplane in the sky, she would know that the crew on board was being trained to be the opposite of her. It was a hard, relentless karma, a reckoning that followed her long after she was escorted out of the building, a ghost haunting the airline she could never again be a part of. 3 months later, the autumn light streamed into Zoe's bedroom, illuminating the specks of dust dancing in the air. The room, usually a chaotic and vibrant collage of her life, was now organized into neat boxes, ready for her move to college in Rhode Island. But on the easel in the center of the room sat her latest and most powerful piece. It was a large charcoal and graphite drawing. It depicted the interior of a plane cabin, but the perspective was warped and claustrophobic, the walls seeming to press in on a central figure. The figure, a girl, was rendered with soft, vulnerable lines, but her face was obscured, except for a single defiant eye that stared directly at the viewer. Surrounding her were shadowy, distorted figures, their faces indistinct smudges of judgment. But the most striking feature was the flight attendant, drawn with sharp, aggressive angles, her smile a grotesque slash of white in a furious face. The drawing was raw, emotional, and breathtakingly honest. She had titled it simply Seat 2A. Her father stood in the doorway, watching her for a moment before speaking. "That's the one," he said softly. "That's the piece that will get everyone's attention." Zoe turned, a small smile on her face. "It's how I made sense of it," she confessed. "I couldn't get the feeling out of my head, that feeling of being trapped, of being looked at and judged by everyone. Drawing it was like letting the pressure out." Robert walked over and stood beside her, studying the artwork. "I still feel a sense of failure when I look at this," he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "That this happened in my house, on my watch. I'm your father. I'm supposed to protect you from things like this. And the very company I built was the weapon used against you. You can't control what's in every single person's heart, Dad," Zoe said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "But you can control what you do about it, and you did." She was right. The Zoe Initiative had been rolled out across the company with incredible speed. It was not a typical boring HR seminar. Robert had hired a leading sociological consulting firm to design an immersive, scenario-based training program. Flight crews were put into simulations, forced to confront their own unconscious biases in real time. The training was difficult, uncomfortable, and profoundly effective. Feedback from employees was overwhelmingly positive. Many long-serving attendants admitted they'd never considered their own biases before and felt better equipped to handle difficult situations with empathy rather than just authority. Ascend Air's customer satisfaction scores, which had always been high, began to inch up even further. Meanwhile, for Brenda Jenkins, the world had shrunk. After a month of futilely applying to other major airlines and being met with polite but firm rejections, she had lowered her sights. She found herself in the drab interview room of a low-cost regional carrier, the kind of airline she used to look down upon. The interview with the hiring manager, a man named Paul, seemed to be going well. He was impressed by her years of experience. "Everything looks great on your resume, Brenda," Paul said, smiling. "Just one final formality, the reference check with Ascend Air. I'm sure it'll be glowing." He made the call on speakerphone. When the Ascend Air HR representative came on the line, her voice was professionally neutral. "Yes, we can confirm Brenda Jenkins was employed with us for 22 years. Her employment was terminated for cause following a Code Indigo investigation." Paul's smile vanished. "Code Indigo? Can you elaborate?" "The findings included gross misconduct, filing a false report against a passenger, and endangerment of a minor. We can't provide further details, but our records are clear. She is not eligible for rehire." The line went dead. Paul slowly placed the receiver back on the cradle. He looked at Brenda, his eyes now cold and distant. The job offer evaporated before it was even made. "I'm sorry, Ms. Jenkins," he said, his tone all business. "I don't think you're the right fit for our company." As Brenda walked out into the parking lot, the full weight of her actions finally landed. It wasn't just about losing her job. It was about losing her reputation, her future, her very name in the industry she had dedicated her life to. She was now the one who was judged instantly, the one who didn't belong. Back in her room, Zoe carefully placed Seat 2A into a protective art portfolio. It would be the centerpiece of her application. The ordeal had been painful, but she refused to let it be just a scar. It had become a source of strength, a defining story of resilience that now fueled her art with a purpose and depth it didn't have before. She was no longer just the CEO's daughter or the girl who was unjustly accused. She was Zoe Washington, the artist, and she was ready to ascend. This story is a powerful reminder that prejudice and abuse of power, no matter how small or subtle, can have devastating consequences. For Zoe Washington, a moment of triumph was almost turned into a traumatic ordeal by one person's baseless judgment. But it also shows us the incredible power of truth, integrity, and accountability. Brenda's world came crashing down not just because she targeted the CEO's daughter, but because her lies were exposed by the simple, brave act of a witness speaking up and a system that was ultimately forced to look at itself in the mirror. The hard karma she faced wasn't just losing her job. It was becoming a catalyst for the very change that would prevent someone like her from ever causing such harm again. If this story resonated with you, and if you believe in the importance of standing up against injustice, please take a moment to hit that like button. Share this video with your friends and family to spread this powerful message of accountability, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell. We are dedicated to bringing you more compelling stories like this one, and we wouldn't want you to miss a single one. Thank you for listening.